I know you're all very busy people, so I don't want to waste any of your time. We'll get started right on time and get you out of here as quickly as we can. Before we roll into the presentation on the budget situation, I did want to let you know that I have been having conversations with the Board of Education about returning next year, and it's kind of, I've used the analogy, it's kind of like dating. You know, we're testing, they're testing me out, I'm kind of testing them out. We're on about the 5th or 6th date, and we're ready to go steady. So at the next board meeting, unless they change their mind on what they told me Monday night, they're going to be approving a contract for me to return next year, so I will be back. I don't know if it'll turn into an engagement in marriage, but time will tell. One step at a time. Anyway, I want to begin my presentation here by saying that during the next half hour, I'm going to attempt to explain our current district budget situation to you. I can tell you school district budgets are complicated. And the reason I know that is I was a principal for 19 years before I understood how a real district budget worked. And you think, how the heck can a principal last that long and not understand how a district budget works? There's so much that goes into a district budget and school finance and things that it's just a very complicated thing. And it wasn't until I became an assistant superintendent and really lived it day to day that I began to fully understand it. So I'm going to explain some things to you that I don't expect everybody to walk out of here and totally understand. It took me a couple decades to learn it. I'm going to give you a crash course in about 30 minutes, but it's important stuff for all of us to understand. And down the road, if you ever have any questions on anything I say here today, pick up the phone, stop in, grab me by the arm when I'm walking down the hall, and I'll be glad to explain anything in more detail. Much the same way the governor or the president do in their State of the State and State of the Union addresses, I will share with you a lot of factual information. It's information that I have not had any part in creating, but it's information that will greatly impact the way I do my job and the way we all do our jobs in this school district as we go through a very difficult time both financially and educationally. Many of you may be shocked and surprised at what you're about to hear. That's not my intent. I don't want you walking out of here losing sleep and fretting. That's not my goal here. I only want you to be informed so that you know the truth. I want you to understand what we as a school district and as educators are about to face in the year ahead. Some of you may wonder why I made this a mandatory meeting. I did it because it's important that during the months ahead we all start off with good communication. I know how the rumor mill works. And I know you can only control what you say to one person. You cannot control what that person says to the next person, who says to the next person, who says to the next person. And that's where we all get in trouble when that kind of stuff happens. And that's how a lot of misinformation gets spread. So I'm going to do everything I humanly can do to give you guys good communication. I probably will not pull you in a big meeting like this again. I may do some podcasts and throw some videos out on the network for you to watch. I may send you some emails with information, but I am going to do everything I can to keep you in the loop. I don't want to surprise you. Good communication will be crucial to all of us getting through this situation. I also want to remind you, I am just the messenger. If you don't like the message, please do not shoot me. 2 years ago, I went to the state school board convention with my Board of Education from Hortonville, where I worked at the time, and Governor Doyle stood up in front of 1,000 or so board members and he said this: staying even is the new increase. That was 2 years ago in January. I thought this was the worst thing in the world when he said this. I thought what he was telling us is schools are going to get no more new money. You get the same amount of money you got last year in state aid. And that's horrible because we always, for decades, every single year you got more money than you did the year before. Why? Because your expenses went up. You had to pay teachers, you had to do all this, you give people raises, all those things had to happen. So you always needed more money. Well, we always got it until 2 years ago. I know you went through a thing here and had to make some cuts, and I'll briefly describe what those are to remind you. But in my district in Hortonville at the time, we had to cut $1 million because we lost $1 million in state aid. And that was tough. And I had an administrative team that wrestled with that mightily. I had a board of education that wrestled with that mightily. I had faculty, teaching staff, and support staff that wrestled with that. But we were all together part of the solution. It wasn't one superintendent solving it. It wasn't 7 board members. It wasn't, a handful of administrators. It was all the teachers joining in with ideas. And at the end, I'm going to ask you for your help. So at the time, Kewanee, Hortonville, every district in Wisconsin had to wrestle with no state aid. Well, what did you guys have to deal with here? Here you lost 8.4% of your equalized aid, your state aid. For this district, almost $250,000 you didn't get. 81,000. This district laid off 8 aides when that happened. The savings from the layoffs were used to fund the hiring of a high school special education teacher, which cost $58,000 in salary and benefits. And a side note, most of those laid off staff were eventually returned to fill other positions. 7 plus 1, $110,000. 7 teachers, 1 business office staff retired that year, which increased retiree insurance by $110,000. Now there was some savings with that because when you don't replace a teacher, you're saving that salary. If you replace that veteran teacher with a new teacher, you are saving something on salary as well. I couldn't get my fingers on what those numbers were, but understand there was a savings as well to balance that off. 0% and 0% and $40,000. 2 years ago, administrators and non-represented staff agreed to a 0% increase in salary, and they all agreed to switch to the WCA, Wisconsin Counties Association health insurance, at a 0% cost increase. That saved the school district $40,000. So that would knocked off 40 out of the 200 and whatever this district was in the hole. 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3. We added 1 section of pre-K, 1 section of kindergarten that year, 1 section of first grade. So even though the district had to cut $250,000, they added 3 new teachers. Why? Because the students' needs required it. Why do some things get added when you have to cut? Because you always have to look at what are the student needs. That's what drives your school budget. And we had some increasing numbers at those grade levels. And you can't put 30 kids in kindergarten. You can't put 30 kids in first grade. So even though we were cutting some things on one end, we were adding some things on the other. That's going to happen again. Not just in Kewanee, it's going to happen everywhere. Because that's the way schools have to operate. In Hortonville, the same year we cut $1 million, we added $500,000 to the budget to implement full-day kindergarten. We were one of 6 school districts in Wisconsin that only had half-day 5-year-old kindergarten. That was wrong. We needed to make that right. And our strategic plan said early childhood education was crucial to the success of our district. So even though we had to cut $1 million, we added $500,000 to implement that. So that's another example of you cut on one end, but you have to add on the other. And we will probably end up having to do something similar to that here. So that's not a bad thing to do. So one of the things, and this will be one of the rumor things that go around, when you read a board agenda and you see them spending some money on something, you're going to say, how the heck can they spend the money on that when they're cutting somebody over here, that kind of a thing. So understand that's part of it. The board has a tough job. They have to really look at the student needs, and they have to balance the politics of the community, and that's a delicate balance at times. Plus 1 minus 1 equals 0. The science department was restructured when we made those cuts, which resulted in the elimination of 1 science teacher, but the savings from that position resulted in the hiring of a high school math teacher. And again, I wasn't here at the time, but my guess is the student needs dictated we had that need in math. So even though we're cutting on one end, we're adding it on the other. So what does this all mean? In 2009-10, even though this district had to make up for a huge loss in state aid and you cut a lot, you were able to add in some areas. Why? Because students' needs required it. And it was a year of change, and even though I wasn't here at the time, I can imagine that some of the decisions made that year were not very popular with some people. Am I right? Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what I took 19 years to learn. Thank you. What I took 19 see, there's a reason he's sitting in the front row. General fund revenue. Okay, this school district this year is taking in about $10.4 million in revenue. That's all the money that comes in. Where does that money come from? Okay, it comes from 4 areas: the state, the federal government, local resources, and other sources. Local resources are your tax dollars, your property tax bill. Let's break those pieces of the pie and look at them a little more carefully. If you look, state sources are the biggest piece of the pie, the blue part. That's $6 million. So about 60% of every dollar this school district receives comes from the state of Wisconsin. Where does the state of Wisconsin get that money? Sales tax, income tax. Those are the 2 big areas that they get the tax money to give to the schools. That little teeny tiny piece of the pie on the top, that's our federal money. That's where we get all the mandates, No Child Left Behind, and all the things that require high accountability and all the thing. And look at all the money they give us to do that. It's a shocker, isn't it? Local sources, about 40% of our budget, or 35% say, comes from property tax. And a very small amount comes from other sources, grants, things like that. Okay, let's take a closer look at how we spend our money. Spend our money in a variety of different areas: special education, insurance, dues and fees, equipment, supplies, purchase services, and salaries and benefits. Okay, let's break that pie down a little bit and take a look at that. Look at the biggest piece. Every school district in Wisconsin, I'm sorry. Every school district in Wisconsin has a pie that looks like this. The biggest piece of the pie is salary and benefits. Why? Because we're a service industry. We teach kids. You can't teach kids without a teacher. Teachers cost money. We're different than building a car on the assembly line. I had a business man who owned a business who was on our board, and every time he saw this, I mean, the guy would get red and he'd get mad and everything. He said, boy, if I ran my business like that, I'd go bankrupt. And he's right, he would. Because he's building stuff. He's not educating kids. In business, that salary and benefit piece is probably more in the 25% range, but again, it's a whole different thing. So that's not surprising that, ours is 70%, because our greatest resources are our people. You can't teach without teachers. The other thing is, the people sitting in this room, are the most highly educated workforce in the entire county. In fact, if you have a master's degree, you are probably in the top 1%, probably in the top 1/10 of 1% of education attained of everybody who lives in this county, or in any county for that matter. Only a very tiny number of businesses have such a highly educated workforce. But a highly educated workforce costs money. This year we're spending $7.3 million to pay all the people who work here. Whoops. Hang on. I jiggled my computer. $425,000. That's how much it would cost this school district to give every employee a 3.8% raise, a package raise next school year. That's the single largest increase of any line item in the budget. Since 1993, because of the QEO law, virtually every single school district in Wisconsin gave their employees at least a 3.8% package every single year for all those years. The problem with that is at the same time they instituted that, they also instituted revenue limits, and we'll get into revenue limits a little bit later. But the revenue limit amount, the amount of money you could raise in taxes was a lot less than what you could pay teachers. So as a result, there was that gap, and again, I'll get into that a little bit later. So For next year's budget, the number one line item will be whatever raises our employees get. We know that already. 6,900, $250,000. What else do we spend our money on? We spend $250,000 in this school district to pay for kids to go to other school districts. Open enrollment. Every time a student goes online, now you don't have to fill out a piece of paper. You go online, 3 weeks in February, fill out the paperwork or the form on the online. Takes about 5 minutes. Child gets to go to another school district. Every time that happens, we send $6,900 to that school district. Algoma, Mishicot, wherever they happen to go. This year, we sent $250,000 out. Now, the good news is when we pull kids in and they live in other districts and come here, they send us a check for the $6,900. Now, it's about a wash. We actually receive a few more kids than we send. So we're making a little bit on the deal, but wouldn't it be great if we could get some of these kids back? Because, you know, if I could give each one of you $6,900 for your classroom, I think you could do some pretty amazing things. Now let's take a look at a closer look at this year's budget. Our current budget for this year, not next year, this year shows $161,583 deficit. In other words, once we add up all the revenue we anticipate receiving and pay all the bills we think we're going to have to pay this year, we're going to be $161,000 in the hole on June 30th. Where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from our savings account. In the school district, we call our savings account the fund balance. What if your home budget looked like this? You paid your mortgage, you paid your car payment, you paid your cable TV bill, you paid all your utilities, you bought your groceries, and at the end of the month, your checking account was $1,000 in the hole. And the next month, it was another $1,000 in the hole. So now you're $2,000 in the hole. And the third month, it's another $1,000 in the hole. Now you're $3,000 in the hole. What would you do? Would you? You might have to take that money from your savings account. You might have to take it from your kids' college fund. You might have to take it from your IRA. But chances are, you'd think about changing something in your life, something you spend money on. You might drop your cable TV, or you might go out to eat less often, or you might change your own oil instead of taking it in to be changed. It would mean a change in lifestyle. That's not much fun, but it would be necessary if that happened to your budget at home. When we're $161,000 in the hole, we will have to make some changes. It won't be fun, but it's necessary, just like it would be in your budget at home. So that's what we're going to have to do in this school district. I didn't create this deficit. On October 1st, the first day I walked into this district, 20 minutes after I started on the job, I was sitting there with the board president telling me, we got a $161,000 deficit, by the way. They didn't tell me that before I was hired. But we did, I'll be real honest. We talked about how we would handle this kind of a situation when I was being interviewed by the board. And I told them how I handled a $1 million deficit in Hortonville. And I'll be real honest, I think that's one of the reasons why they hired me. They thought I was somebody who could help this district through this kind of a situation. So I didn't create the deficit. It was here the day I walked in. And it's my job as the administrative leader in this district, and it's our administrative team's job, and it's our Board of Education's job to deal with it. So what are we going to do? $22,358. That's a start. That's how much money the school district saved December 20th when they voted to contract with the city rather than the county for police liaison officer services. Bid it out. City's bid, $22,000 less. Okay? Basically, the big difference was salary and benefits. Okay, guess what? Police are a service industry too. You know, and the county pays their officers better than the city pays their officers. So as a result, the school district saved some money. Now, I'll tell you, that was a tough decision. It was a 4-3 vote on the board. They wrestled with that. They struggled. Why? Because Officer Becky was such a great person. Everybody liked her. She did a great job here. We'll miss her tremendously. But the board was staring at a $161,000 hole, and they had a chance to plug $22,000 worth of it. So they made a very tough decision. Is it going to be perfect? No, we probably took a step backwards. Jim Kleiman's a great guy. I think he's going to do a great job as PLO, but it's going to take him a little bit of time to get up to speed and get running. But eventually, I believe, and the board believes, that he will do just as good of a job as Officer Becky, and the district will save $22,000 a year forever. Every year, that savings is there. Change is hard. It is. What else do we spend our money on this year? Well, our electric bill is $158,000. These are significant expenses, all of our utilities. And every year they go up, just like yours at home. Natural gas bill for the district, $145,000. We've done a lot to conserve, thanks to Dennis. We've done a lot to conserve in gas and electricity. Busing costs us $500,000 just to get our kids to and from school every year. Okay, this one's probably too small for you to read, but I will read it to you. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at our demographics of our families. Wisconsin loses income to migration. From 2004 to 2006, about 145,000 families moved out of Wisconsin and took with them incomes totaling $7 billion. And 133 million families moved into the Badger State, bringing in about $6.2 billion. 145,000 out, 133,000 in, took with them $7 billion in income, brought in $6.2 billion in income, 10.8% less income. So in that trade-off, in a 4-year period, we lost 12,000 families and $800 million in annual income. That's $800 million of state income tax that would have been paid in, that would have gone to schools to support schools. So you wonder why the state has a budget deficit? That's a big part of the reason. We're losing families. These aren't people, these are families with kids who go to school. You wonder why we have 20 fewer students in the school district this year. We've got families who are leaving. And other families are coming in, but the families that are coming in aren't making as much money, and maybe they're not having as many kids in school. Let's look at a couple other numbers. 15% in 2000, 28% in 2010. 10 years ago, 15% of the students who attended school in this school district qualified for free or reduced lunch. A decade later, it's 28%. This year, 28%. That's an 86% increase, almost double in 10 years. Many families are hurting financially. If you don't believe me, there's some more numbers to look at. $21,954. That's the poverty threshold for a 4-person family in 2009. So if you have 4 people in your family, mom, dad, 2 kids, or mom and 3 kids, 4 people in the household, and you make less than $22,000 a year, you're considered to be living in poverty. That's the definition. In 2000, out of 72 counties in Wisconsin, 2 of them, only 2, had more than 15% of their families living in poverty. Milwaukee would have been 1 for sure. I'm not sure what the other one was. And 9 years later, it's 10. 5-fold increase. So 10 counties. Now, you say, hey, that's not Kewanee. We don't have that people living in poverty in Kewanee. Kewanee's poverty rate increased 15% during this past decade. 15% increase in the poverty level in this county in the last 10 years. That's people making, families of 4, living on less than $22,000 a year. Equalized value. That's one of those phrases I didn't understand until I was an assistant superintendent, but I'll give you a simple explanation of it. Equalized value is if you added up every single piece of taxable property that was within the borders of the school district. And our school district is over 100 square miles. So you add up every farm, every house, there's business property that's also taxable, computers and things like that, can be taxable. So you add all that stuff up, and that's called a district's equalized value, okay? Minus 2.29% is the amount of property within the borders of this school district. That's the decrease in the value in the past year. It was assessed 2.29% more a year ago than it is today. If you live in Kewanee, your house is worth, on average, 2.29% less than it was a year ago. Your house is going backwards. It's not going forwards, and we know that. I mean, we've read the papers. We know what's happening to the housing market. I don't know if any of you have tried to sell a house lately, but that's the reality of it. Now, I checked with Kim. I said, well, what's been the history here in this district? She said, well, this is a first. This hasn't happened here before. She said, usually it goes up. It's a plus 3 to 4%. This first year, it's a minus 2.29. 1.98%, minus 1.98%. That's how much our student enrollment decreased this year. We lost 2% of our kids in 1 year. These are important numbers because when a school district's numbers start looking like this, they've got problems. Let's take a closer look at our enrollment. We lost 138 students during the past decade. That's a 12% decline in 10 years. The number one factor in state aid, where we get 2/3 of our money to fund our school, is based on state aid, revenue limit increase, and student enrollment. Okay? So when you read the papers and see all these school districts that are slashing and burning and laying off, you know, I mean, I live in the valley, and, you know, Appleton, every year it's 35 teachers get laid off, and Kaukauna, it was 39 a year or two ago. Those are districts where that's the issue. It's decline in enrollment, it's the decline in equalized value. So this decline in enrollment has haunted this district in the past, and it will continue. I mean, when you're in a decline in enrollment situation, that's a killer. $1.2 billion, $2.4 billion, $3.2 billion. I'm going to tell you it doesn't matter. These are all such huge numbers, it doesn't matter who's right. These are all predictions on what the state structural budget deficit for the next 2 years is going to be. And it doesn't matter which one of these is right. One of them is right. And again, it depends who you listen to. But that's a huge number. And this number is going to have a huge effect on every student who attends every public school in Wisconsin. And it's different this time, and here's why it's different. We've had structural deficits in the past. You probably said, well, it's a little boy who cried wolf. Well, we've heard this before. We had, I think last time it was $800 million deficit they said, and they ended up balancing the budget. But what Wisconsin did is they used their credit card to pay their bills. What they would do is the legislators got creative to try to make the budget work, and they would funnel costs for 1 year into the next biennium. So they would take bills that were really due in 2007, and they would pay for them with 2008 money. And they'd done this for years and years and years. This wasn't a one-time thing. They'd done this for a decade, actually. It goes back to Tommy Thompson. Tommy Thompson did that. Well, it's come back to bite them. And what they banked on with that is that the state economy would grow. More people would move in. Salaries would go up. They'd get more tax revenue, and they could pay that money back. They robbed the transportation fund. They robbed the physician's malpractice fund. They tried to rob, I think, the teacher's pension fund, but they got stopped on that one. They would steal the money from wherever they could to pay the bills. Well, guess what? There's nothing left to steal. There's nothing left to shift. The shell game is over. They can't do that anymore. Plus, these numbers are so big, it would be impossible. These numbers are just so huge. So that's why this is going to be different for this legislature. Okay, talked about equalized aid, which is state aid, and revenue limits. Let's take a little closer look at that. Again, Equalized aid, state aid comes primarily from your state income taxes and the sales taxes you pay. Through a state aid formula, the money is given to the local school district. The formula is very complicated, and the three parts of the equation that are significant are, again, enrollment, equalized value, and the revenue limit, what they allow you to raise the revenue limit. If you look at the blue bar, that's our state aid. And you can see, you know, it's kind of going up most of the time, but the last couple of years actually going down. Losing state aid. And again, the last 2 years we had a recession in Wisconsin. State didn't have the money. Okay, so they didn't have any extra money to give to the schools. Let's talk about revenue limits. Revenue limits are a big part of that equation. What the state government says is, look, school districts, you can only raise your budget this much per student, okay? And they set a dollar amount, and it's part of this formula. It used to be in the $270 range. So if you had, we got about 1,000 kids in this district, so we'll do the simple math. If it's $270 and you have 1,000 kids, that means they're going to say, you can spend $270,000 more next year than you spent this year. You can increase your budget by that much. Typically, that worked out to about a 3% increase in the budget. So you could spend, on average, about 3% more in a school district. Now, the exceptions were if you had a growing enrollment. Okay? I came from the third fastest growing school district in Wisconsin. Hortonville had one school with 1,500 kids in it in 1993. In 16 years later, they had 3,400 kids in 5 schools. They gained 1,000 kids in 10 years. That was the third fastest growing school district. My first year in Hortonville, we had a big problem. You know what the big problem was? Our growth was so fast, we had $600,000 extra because of our state aid, because of that skyrocketing enrollment to spend, and we didn't know what to spend it on. We had bought all the teachers we needed, we had really low class sizes, we had done all the good things we wanted to do, and we had this extra money. So we put a fence around the football field, and we put bleachers on the football field, and we bought a rubber track, and did all kinds of good stuff with it. But it was, when you look back at it now, you say, boy, that was more luxury type things than necessities. That changed. We went from the fastest growing school district to no growth. The last 2 years I was there, we gained 0 kids. We actually lost 9 kids one year. Guess what? Instead of having $600,000 to spend, we were cutting $1 million. That's how quick it can change. So when you lose students, you lose money. When you gain students, you gain money with revenue limits. Now, I said it used to be 270. Guess what? Back when you saw the budget take this hit a couple of years ago, and we cut $1 million, you guys cut $250,000 here. At that time, they dropped that revenue limit increase to $200. Still not too bad. Okay, 1,000 kids times $200. That's 200 grand. You get to raise your budget. And it's been 200 now for a few years. So what does this mean for where Kewaunee gets its funding for schools? Okay, in 2000, we got 34% of our money from local property taxpayers, from your tax bill. If you pay taxes in this school district, 34% of our money came from you. 58% came from the state. In 2009, 39% came from the local, 53% came from the state. So what's happened over that decade is they've expected the local taxpayer to pay more while the state's given us less. See, because what they did is the legislators kept that revenue limit at 200, but they didn't give us enough money to pay for the 200. They said if you want the 200, you have to go to your local taxpayer, raise your mill rate, and then you can get your money that way. So what they did is they shifted the responsibility on local school boards to raise taxes, not Madison. You look at that and say, well, gosh, that's only a 5% difference. That's not so much, right? Well, if you pay taxes in the Kewaunee School District, you're paying $900,000 more now, and the state's paying $634,000 less now. And that's in the last 4 years. This is since 2006. 4 years, that's how it's changed. Mill rate. Again, the mill rate is the part of your tax bill, your property tax bill, that determines how much of the money goes to fund the schools, the local schools. And you can see our mill rates, kind of going up. It's now at 9.25 this year, which is right about at the state average. So it's going up, and chances are it'll continue to go up in that direction. These are the scariest numbers I'm going to share with you this afternoon. 38 of 132. There are 38 new state lawmakers in Madison as of Monday out of 132. We only have 132 make up all the laws. These 132 people decide how every penny in Wisconsin gets spent. They decide how much schools get, how much prisons get, how much highways get, and 38 of them are brand new. They started 2 days ago. Most of them campaigned on lowering taxes and on reform, changing what's the status quo, changing what's there. Everything will be on the table with these 38 legislators in the next few months. Unfortunately, because schools get 38% of the state tax dollars, 38 out of every $100 the state of Wisconsin gets in sales tax, income tax, all the taxes they collect, cigarette taxes, every tax they collect, 38 cents out of every dollar goes to public schools. Because of that, public schools will be targeted. These are the three most important numbers I'm sharing with you this afternoon. These are the numbers being tossed around by legislators today on the possible revenue limit increases for next school year. They're either going to be 200, which is what they are currently. A lot of people are throwing out $100 increase, and a lot of these 38 people who campaigned on $0. They said, we want it to be zero. We don't want schools to get any more, we don't want them to be able to raise any more revenue. That was their campaign, that was their platform, and they got elected. If it's 200, that's our best case scenario. If it's 200, I'm going to be the happiest guy in the world, because that's our best case scenario. Because when that happens, we're only going to have to cut $455,000 next year if it's $200. If we're fortunate enough to get $200 revenue limit increase, this district will spend $455,000 more than they spent this year. Next year they'll have to spend $455,000. Now there's some assumptions in that. We're assuming salary raises for everybody, and we built in 3.8%. Who knows what that will be, but you saw back a couple slides back, to give everybody a 3.8%, it's $425,000. Well, that's obviously a big chunk of it. So we don't know what that is, but that's going to be part of that equation. If it's zero, like a lot of those 38 want, then we're going to have to cut $590,000. Those are scary numbers. There's four things any school district can do. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not the only superintendent looking at this. I came from a meeting today from the 36 other CSIS 7 superintendents, and guess what? Every one of them is looking at this. I sat next to Greg Moss, the superintendent in Green Bay. He told me his number is $10 million. Green Bay's got to cut $10 million. So this is not unique to Kewanee. Every district in Wisconsin is facing this. Four things any school district can do to deal with this kind of a situation. One, increase property taxes. Whoops, I only got 3 on there. Fourth one got cut off. I'll have to tell you what it was. Let me go. Well, the 4 are increase property taxes, have a referendum to exceed the revenue limit, become more cost efficient, and budget reductions. Okay, let's look at each one of those 4 in a little more detail. Well, let's talk about increased property taxes. If they lower the revenue limit to $100, or worse yet, to $0, we can't even do that. You won't even be able to raise the property taxes to do it, because they're going to say you can't. $0 means $0. If the revenue limit is 0, they're saying you can't raise any more revenue than you had this year. It's 0. So that one will be off the table. That's why I'm hoping it's 200, obviously, because then we can at least go to the property tax levy to get the money. Referendum to exceed the revenue limits, okay? Very few of those have been successful. Why? Look at the economy. You know, I shared the numbers, the poverty level, the free and reduced lunch. Wisconsin still has, I don't know, 9% unemployment. You know, what chance does any referendum have to pass? If you're lucky enough to pass a referendum, it's a one-year shot. It's the only ones that have passed have been, give me some extra money for 1 year. Okay? In order to make that work, you'd have to have an ongoing referendum. You'd have to have your taxpayer say, we'll let you raise taxes every year forever. Because unless you get that, as soon as the referendum doesn't pass, you're looking at that hole. Okay, that's why the only referendum that's going to solve the problem is an ongoing one, and I don't think one of those has passed for years. Years and years and years. Well, it's been a long time since any of them passed. The economy was flourishing the last time one of those passed. Become more cost efficient. This district, I looked, and I've had some good conversations with people, and this district actually has done a lot to become more efficient. You've cut a lot of the things that were easy to cut. We call that picking the low-hanging fruit. You've done energy conservation. You've done things like that to keep costs down. Now, is there more out there? Yeah, absolutely, and that's where I'm going to ask your help in a minute to help me find those things. But we're going to have to become more efficient at things, because I'm sure there's still things we're doing that we could be doing better. Budget reductions. I threw out a number between $500,000 and or $450,000 and $600,000. You can't tackle that kind of money without talking about people. 70% of our budget is people. As much as I hate to stand up in front of you, I feel horrible saying that. I feel terrible. But I'd be lying to you if I said we could do that without looking at people. So, everything is going to be considered. And I'm talking administrative staff. We're going to have to look at administration. When I say cutting people, I'm not talking about just teachers. I'm not talking about just support staff. I'm talking about administrators. There's going to be no sacred cow. We can't tackle the issue we've got and the numbers we've got without with anything being safe or protected. We're going to have to consider everything. So, by now, most of you probably are ready to shoot me. But nobody sitting in this room today created this mess. Our country, our state, and our community are facing times that no one has faced for 3 generations. The economy, the unemployment rate, and the tax situation in this country have all converged to give us fewer resources to educate our kids at exactly the same time public expectations and accountability for public schools is at an all-time high. We're all being asked to do much more with much less. And this is why I need your help. 100 heads are better than 1 superintendent, or 5 administrators, or 7 board members. Together, we can get through these tough times. Together, we'll continue to offer the Kewanee students a top-notch education. A year after we cut $1 million in Hortonville, I sat in an administrator meeting. I said, okay, we cut $1 million worth of services. We were all wringing our hands. We were all saying how horrible this was. I said, is education as we know it gone down the tubes in the Hortonville School District? Have we failed any kids? Are there any kids who did not get as good of an education? And honestly, the administrative team looked at each other and said, no, we still did it. Now, it was hard. Everybody had to do a little bit more with a little bit less, but they were able to do it. and I'm going to tell you, a year from now, that's the way it's going to be here. This is going to be a struggle. We're going to cut some things that nobody wants to cut. But a year from now, I'm going to sit in front of you, and I'll ask you the question. Are kids in this school district still getting a top quality education? And I know because of the people sitting in this room, the answer is going to be yes, you're going to do it. I've gotten to know quite a few of you in just the short 3 months I've been here, and this district has excellent teachers and excellent support staff. And you will carry us through this. By now, some of you are thinking, why did I ever get into this field? Let me remind you why. In spite of the pressures we face, the high expectations placed on us, and the lack of respect we get from some people, we still have the best jobs on the planet. We get to teach kids. We get to spend every day of our lives with kids. And it doesn't get any better than that. Each one of you has the chance to make a difference in a child's life. And you have a chance to make a difference in their future. Not many people get that opportunity. It doesn't get any better than that. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules. I appreciate it. I don't like to call mandatory meetings, but this was an important message. There's no way I could have gotten this information to you as well as talking to you face to face. You know, you can't do this with an email. You can't do this in any other fashion. I hope you understand a little bit more about school finance. I hope you understand a little bit more about our budget situation. Don't walk out of here depressed. Don't walk out of here fearing for your job. Walk out here saying, what can I do to be part of the solution? What can I do to help? I'm going to say, if you've got some ideas on some of those cost efficiency things, email me. Pick up the phone, call me, stop in and see me. Grab me by the arm when I'm walking down the hall. I will listen to every single suggestion I'm given, and I promise you I'll bring your suggestions to the administrative team. We will discuss them seriously, and ones that we feel are full of merit and will fly, we'll take to the board and look and see what we can do. I'm not blowing smoke at you when I say, you know, your ideas are important. They are. You're going to be. Just I look back, and when I gave a similar speech 2 years ago to the Hortonville teachers when we were going through our $1 million thing, I got 80 suggestions from teachers. 80 of them, okay? And they were good ideas, things that we, meaning the administrative team, had never even thought of, okay? Because, you know, we had 250 teachers. Their 250 heads are better than you know, 1 or 5 or 15. And the same is going to be true here. So here, last thing I'll say is please keep the lines of good communication open. Avoid the temptation to spread rumors that may not be true. I promise you that I will listen to your thoughts and ideas. I promise you that I'm going to keep you well informed of where things are going in the next 6 months. Again, thank you for your time.